It's my great honor and pleasure to be here with Rabbi Miriam Margles, who is a rabbi in Toronto, and in addition to leading locally, she also leads workshops around North America. And one of our topic today is relevant to a lot of her work, which is addressing fear. And fear is something that often prevents us from working, from leading, from being happy, even to experiencing love and actualizing our lives. And so let me ask you, how pervasive is fear as a human emotion? And what are some of the negative consequences of not addressing those fears?
Great. It's interesting. I'm fascinated by the topic of fear, not because I've in any way mastered it, but actually because I see the ways that it limits my own life and the ways that it limits so many of us in the shared work that we're, I think, called here to do. I think if you're anything like me, or if you're anything like me, we've become skilled at distracting ourselves, setting up our lives so we avoid situations that feel scary to us, or we numb out. We just sort of turn off the feelings. How many of us watch the news and don't let it actually sink in how terrifying our world is, or thinking about environmental destruction. It's overwhelming, and we need tools and practices to give us the resilience and the flexibility and to let it break our hearts and not let it crush us, to face what's frightening. And I think for me, being committed to wanting to lean into fear, all of us have, by evolutionary or God-given wisdom, a sort of automatic response of fight or flight when we're afraid. It enables the human species to survive, but it's not always the most intelligent choice to run away and hide, or to sort of become defensive and turn ourselves into like hammers and everyone becomes a nail. So I will fight, and I'm interested in cultivating the space that's in between fight and flight, where we can soften, where we can open our hearts, where we can be grounded in something bigger than ourselves and strength. And make conscious choices rather than unconscious reactions to what is the wisdom that this moment needs, and how do I draw up the reserves to meet it. Otherwise, our lives are small, the world is small, we fail to build the relationships that are so strengthening and nourishing. And I think our world needs us to be courageous right now.
I think of Viktor Frankl's teaching that the moral moment is this brief moment between stimulus and response. And to actualize that crucial moment, how much of a spiritual practice we need to ensure that when that brief moment arises, that we are able to choose something other than fight or flight. So how has Judaism informed your approach on this? Is there a particular text that comes to mind that has informed how you think about this issue?
Yes, I think there are a lot of texts and a lot of sources. The one that I'm going to be using in the workshop that I have the delight to be sharing with Valley Beit Midrash, I said it right? Yeah, okay. Is this moment when the Israelites, Bnei Israel, have finally been liberated from slavery in Egypt. And they leave Mitzrayim, they leave the Meitzarim, the narrow and confined places, and they're camping at the edge of Yam Suf, the edge of the Sea of Reeds, when all of a sudden they become aware that the Egyptians are encroaching on them. Pharaoh's changed his mind. He gathers all the chariots and chases after the Israelites. And they see no way forward. They see the Egyptians closing in on them. And it's such a moment of absolute terror. I think in various ways we've all had moments of that where we feel that there's no way out and we are so frightened. And the Israelites turn to Moses and say, why didn't you leave us in Egypt? Right. Why did you bring us here to die? We knew oppression in Egypt and we were used to it. And we would rather have that tight, limited, narrow, broken life than this unknown and terrifying moment. Right. And Moses' instruction is profound. He says, Al tira'u, don't be in yirah at this moment. And I'll say more about what I mean by yirah, but the translation is also often don't be afraid. And then there are these verbs. The first one is hityatzvu, collect yourselves. Ground yourself in something greater than you. Draw on that resource of being firmly planted. The second verb is re'u, see. Often when we're scared, we can't actually see what's right in front of us. We project onto it every other moment of similar kind of fear, and the worst outcomes we could possibly imagine, but we're not seeing clearly. So he says, re'u, see what's here. You're not by yourselves. You have all of you together as a community, and see that I, Adonai, am with you.
Yeah.
The next word is tacharishun. Moses says, God will battle for you, you be still, tacharishun. And it's such a beautiful word. I also am involved in mindfulness practice and meditation, and a practice of listening inward. So we need to see what's actually outward. We also need to listen inward to settle ourselves. Fear gets us so buzzing. We can't think clearly. Our bodies tighten and clench. So can we find a sense of clarity and inner stillness to listen deeply? And then God says to Moses, what are you talking to me about? What are you complaining, Vayisa'u, get going. So, hityatzvu, ground, re'u, see, tacharishun, get quiet, get still, and then get going. And I find those words to be really insightful and applicable for any moment of fear.
Yeah.
And I think the last one I would say, going back to the first word in that section, al tira'u. It's interesting that Hebrew, our Jewish sources, have two different words for fear, pachad and yirah. And usually yirah is in relationship to God, to the source of life, the mysterious, wondrous one. And it is right and appropriate to have a sense of trembling awe in relationship with what is most true and good and what demands of us our whole selves. But al tira'u, I hear, is don't mistake this moment of human fear for actually what is ultimately terrifying but is holding you. So be grounded in that. Don't turn your fear toward the Egyptians as the deepest fear that there is. That's pachad. You're allowed to be afraid. But there is a deeper, trembling one that is holding you at this moment.
Right, yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Because, you could have imagined the answer being, the answer to fear is faith. And the answer to fear is God will take care of you. And, but actually what you're saying is that the gift of being taken care of is accessing the wisdom that enables us to take care of ourselves individually and collectively, and not merely to throw our hands up. And this is a much more profound spiritual practice, I think, than just the answer of, have faith. Yes.
I would also
Yes.
say in that if we're created in the divine image, every single one of us, that we actually have that resource within and without. That we can see it in how we look at one another and call each other to be our most courageous selves, exactly in the moments where we feel like I'm not up to the task, I don't have it in me.
Right.
So how can we echo for one another the capacity to rise up to that?
Right, beautiful, So someone says, I'm in. I have fear in my life. I agree with those steps. But they need a practice to really internalize this. And in your case, we even go beyond the head and the heart into the body. So tell us a little bit about that. What do some of your explorations into the journey of embodiment or bodied practice, spiritual practices, have to offer to addressing fear?
Sure. Well, one story first. I was working with a theater group, Theater of Witness, directed by Thea Sepanek, really creative, interesting woman. And we were working on a project of working with 8 men serving life sentences in a prison in Pennsylvania. Guiding them to tell their stories, and those stories would then be heard by youth at risk, people involved in correctional services, the justice system. Very interesting project. And we were partnering with someone named Joanna Flanders Thomas, a South African woman, soft-spoken embodiment of courage. And she was doing work with gang members in Poolsmoor Prison in South Africa, perhaps the most violent prison in South Africa. And she tells the story of realizing that this was the work she was called to do in her life, and she was terrified. And she was thinking about how she needed to prepare to do this scary work. And the thing that scared her even more than working with violent gang members was roller coasters. So she tells the story of, before starting to do this work, she went to an amusement park, chose the most terrifying roller coaster, with dead drops and flips upside down, and she got on the roller coaster, feeling the fear in her whole body. So often we don't allow ourselves to feel fear in its fullness. And she said, okay, here's what I need to do. I will fear it, I will feel it completely, and survive it. And she went on this roller coaster, screaming her head off, feeling the fear in every part of her body, and releasing it. And she said that the embodied experience was fundamental to her being able to walk into the room with these inmates. And I think that very much informs how I think about exploring embodiment. I would also say, so that's one piece of the relationship.
That reminds me, not all fear is obviously from trauma, but sometimes it can be.
Right.
And some of the techniques I'm working with soldiers who have come back with PTSD, of actually giving them virtual reality activities around being back in warfare, actually stimulating that bodily experience of fear as a way of then sitting with it and being able to address it within a safe environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's so important, to have contexts to feel how scared we are, and then have tools to shift it. And so in the workshop that I'm going to be teaching, that I had the honor of, you were in last year when I taught it. We embody these key words. What does it look like to lihityasev, to be grounded? So how do we feel that through the soles of our feet, through our spines, on the floor, leaning against another person? How do we physically ground in our bodies? What is ru'u? How do we use our eyes to perceive with clarity, from a place of relaxed and non-anxious seeing? How do we discover stillness? So we play with moving and then coming to stillness. And what does that require of our breath? What does that require of releasing through the body? And the get going, what's the feeling of moving from a place of first being grounded and still, and then sort of really being playful with movement? That's one element of exploring the words directly from the text. And then also thinking of moments of fear in our lives. So I ask people to choose a moment, something they're afraid of, either something that's happened to revisit, or something that they're anticipating, and to find gestures that embody and externalize the fear. Does it feel like tightness? Does it feel like grip? Does it, so actually showing those, being able to see them ourselves with more clarity and having others witness them. So if my fear of one particular thing kind of looks like this, then we explore what's the physical opposite. So without getting into trying to define, how do I undo this fear? When I explore the sensations of opposite, of opening, something happens from the outside, from the physical to the emotional and intellectual and psychological, that transforms the whole experience for me.
So what's the larger pedagogical goal here? What's your hope for participants in a workshop like this, that they will be able to carry forward?
I would say that the two sides of being able to externalize the fear and embody it, to be able to see it more clearly and understand it, the collective experience of knowing you're not alone in your fear. We are all terrified so much of the time. And so having more concrete ability to see it with compassion and relate to our own fears with compassion is a key piece of it. And giving people the tools, both being able to read Jewish sources and Jewish texts as informing every aspect of our lives, and so giving us guidance through such a fundamentally human experience of fear, and having the tools to creating more spaciousness, more yielding, more flexibility, so we can carry that into our lives.
So often when I have a moment of awareness of fear in the moment, I realize that it's often about a past scar and not about this situation. There are times where a situation warrants fear and a certain unique response, but oftentimes I think we're not bringing our best selves because we allow unconsciously those past scars to inform each new moment of fear into that fight or flight, as you talked about. So my last question for you is, how can people practice this with you? If others are interested in learning about these kinds of workshops, these type of spiritual practices, how might they engage you in this? And what types of workshops do you do?
I lead a whole range of workshops, and I'm delighted to be invited to other communities. I do a lot of work around conflict, and specifically where conflict, I've done quite a bit of work with Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Muslims around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but also a whole host of moments of conflict in our lives, and where the fears and the feelings of being misunderstood, the conflicts in values and vision, can be a place of such stuckness and harm. So offering those kinds of workshops. I think there are also a lot of practices of being present with fear, meditation, breathing. Those are also key.
Do you have a website, or what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
My congregation in Toronto is the Danforth Jewish Circle.
Perfect.
Look us up online.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Check out Rabbi Miriam Margles, her material online. Thank you so much.
Thank you.